Hey, welcome to Season 2 of the Omg Tarot podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay, aka Omg Tarot. We're back, and this season, expect more interviews, expect more how-to, and expect more explanations of the what and the why and the how behind reading tarot cards like a pro. Expect to hear a little bit more about the minor arcana, and expect to hear about decks that aren't the Rider-Waite Smith deck. Full disclosure, that's not my daily driver, but it is the deck that I recommend people start with for a couple of reasons. One is that it's everywhere. And by everywhere, I don't just mean stores, I also mean in tarot resources. This podcast is one of those resources, and so are pretty much every book that you're going to find, every YouTube channel. Whenever you're seeking information about tarot, you're almost always going to find the Rider-Waite Smith deck referenced. And if you're kind of new to reading tarot cards and you're looking for explanations for why to interpret a spread a certain way or what to do with a certain card, having the same deck that's being referenced in all the resources you're consulting is just going to make that a lot easier. The other reason why I recommend that people start with the Rider-Waite Smith deck is because the illustrations are very well fleshed out and really show you what that card means. And now I know what a card means is somewhat subjective, and there's a conversation to be had about textbook definitions and intuition and where do the two meet and how do you employ both in your readings, and that's a discussion worth having, and I think we might have a podcast episode about it. But there's something to be said about a deck that very clearly illustrates here are some people, and those people are doing something, and it's illustrated in a way that's very easy for you as the reader to describe what's happening in the picture. You get into some more abstract decks, and they might not have as detailed pictures. It might be going more on vibes or on the color palette or on feels, and a lot of readers read that way, and that's great. But also a lot of readers who do read that way cut their teeth on a more traditional deck like the Rider-Waite Smith and then moved on to something more abstract. So, yeah, in case you were wondering, I like to get a deck, but I'm not quite sure where to start. That's my personal opinion, is that a Rider-Waite Smith or a deck that's extremely similar. One that I like a lot is the Modern Witch Tarot because it's a bit more modern, obviously, hence the name. And the illustrations are almost exactly the same as the illustrations in the Rider-Waite Smith deck. So if you were to get a tarot book and use it to move your way through the Modern Witch Tarot, you're not going to run into a situation where your deck looks nothing like the book and you're like, what's going on here? And you're feeling very confused. Other good choices I recommend for beginners are the Radiant Smith deck, the Centenary Smith deck. All of those are essentially the Rider-Waite Smith, but with swapped out color palettes, and in some cases, slightly more refined line work on the illustrations. And now, what if you feel like the illustrations in the Rider-Waite Smith deck don't really resonate with you? This is something people experience. For some people, namely those who feel that the Rider-Waite Smith doesn't resonate because the people depicted in the deck are all too homogenous and too old-fashioned, the Modern Witch Tarot is a great option because, as I mentioned, it's modern, but it basically takes the Rider-Waite Smith and drops it into women of the 21st century. I think there's a couple guys in that deck, I don't quite recall. I actually don't have that deck, but it's one that I know a lot of people use, and I think it's a great choice. Another deck that I really like and would consider to be Rider-Waite Smith adjacent is the Morgan Greer deck. I have this deck, and it was my daily driver for a very long time. The only reason it's not is because I used it so much that it's permanently misshapen. It's definitely showing some signs of wear. I still use it, but I just don't use it with the frequency I once did because eventually this thing's going to disintegrate. It's another deck that has very clear, vivid illustrations, and what I like about it is the very saturated color palette. You might be attracted to black and white decks or decks that use a pastel color palette, and that's personal preference. I like really bold, bright colors. Another really fun one that's not currently in my collection, but I might pick up at one point in the future because I really like it, is the Hoi Polloi Tarot. It's just a recoloring of the Rider-Waite Smith, but it's very fun with some psychedelic-inspired imagery, and I just think that's fun. But what if you want to go beyond the Rider-Waite Smith imagery? The world is your oyster. There are so many tarot decks to choose from, and they vary from very detailed images to very abstract ones. If you'd like to stay more so in the realm of images that are highly detailed and very easy to figure out what story is being told, a few of my personal recommendations are the Animal Totem Tarot, which I really like animals, so I really like this deck. This deck has 0 people in it. It's just all different animals illustrating different tarot archetypes. And then another that I like, but I know it's a bit polarizing, is the Deviant Moon deck. This one takes some cues from German Expressionism and just general creepiness. It kind of looks like something Tim Burton would have designed, although it was designed by an artist named Patrick Valenza, and look him up. He's really cool. He's designed a number of tarot decks. He actually has both the Deviant Moon and a Marseille-style deck, as well as a couple of Lenormand decks. So if you like his work, there's quite a bit of it to be had in the tarot realm. But not everybody likes his work, and sometimes I break that deck out and the querent's like, oh, that's creepy. So here's a little tip from a pro reader if you're considering going pro or just tend to bring decks around and do readings for the people in your life. Bring more than one. You don't know what's going to resonate with the querent, and although I might love the Deviant Moon deck, somebody else might find it very off-putting. So typically, when I'm packing for a gig, I'll throw at least 2 decks in my bag, and I'll try to choose decks that are pretty different from each other. Depending on the nature of the gig, I might try to pick out decks that I feel like kind of fit with the vibe. Like, for example, if it's a graduation party, that's like a fun, bright, exciting, yeah, the world is your oyster, let's go kind of energy. So I'll bring a very fun, exciting, colorful deck. Typically, Deviant Moon isn't really the choice for a graduation party, but that's great for a Halloween party. When it's that creepy, darker time of year, out comes the Deviant Moon. Out comes the Tarot of Curiosities, which, look that one up. That's another one I just love, and that's another one by an artist who's local to me. And it's very, very different from the Rider-Waite Smith. So if you're looking for a huge jump off in another direction, check that one out. The woman who designed it is named Nicole Monforti, and she's another artist who has really great work out there, both tarot and non-tarot. So if you like her style, definitely check her out. However, that's a deck I don't think I would ever bring to a bachelorette or a baby shower, unless it was a gothic bachelorette or baby shower, and if that's the vibe the host wants, absolutely. So I guess another tip from a pro, gauge your audience. If you're someone who's doing paid gigs or even free gigs, a situation where you're not just whipping out a tarot card deck while you're sitting with friends, but actually showing up to an event to be the entertainment, try and gauge your deck to what you're actually going to be doing and what the host expects. And if you're not sure, ask the host. That's just good customer service. And to get back to our topic of how to choose a good deck for yourself before we dive into this episode's other topic, which is how to do a year ahead spread, what if you just don't want to start with a Rider-Waite Smith deck? You tried, you looked at it, you're just not feeling it. By all means, start with a deck that you like. Just because I think Rider-Waite Smith is a great place to start doesn't mean you have to. It's not like there's tarot police that are going to come out and arrest you for starting with the Carnival at the End of the World or the Thoth deck. And if you find yourself running into some confusion because there's a lack of resources featuring your deck, and maybe you picked a deck that's a little more abstract or a little more niche, one way that you can ground yourself again and figure out what cards mean, and by this I mean at the more foundational level before you really start intuiting the cards, is to think back to Marseille meanings. I talked a lot about Marseille-style cards in the episode Reading Playing Cards, so feel free to go back and give that one a listen to get another run-through of what the card's traditional meanings are. I actually don't recommend starting with a Marseille-style deck, and if you feel drawn to one, absolutely go ahead and do that, but I think illustrations are very good for beginners, because when you get stuck on a card, One of the most effective problem-solving strategies is to just describe the picture. Just tell me, tell yourself, tell your querent, what's going on in this picture. Let's say, for example, you've pulled the Three of Swords, and you're not quite sure what that means. I just pulled out the Three of Swords from my dog tarot deck, that's another very cute deck. I don't think it's the most beginner-friendly deck because, just like the Tarot of Curiosities, this deck deviates pretty far from the Waite Smith imagery, but it is an adorable deck and it's got really pretty watercolor images. It's by an artist named Megan Lynn Knott, and she also did a deck called the Cat Tarot, which is similarly illustrated, except instead of dogs, it's all cats. Looking at the image of the Three of Swords in this dog tarot, we see a brown, vaguely pit bullish looking dog sitting, looking at the viewer with a bundle of roses in its mouth. One of those roses looks like a heart. The dog is making eye contact with the viewer, and in the background, we see him sitting on a hardwood floor with a light blue wallpaper behind him. On the floor in front of him, we see 3 bone-shaped dog treats. And the dog is wearing a pink ribbon around its neck. So how would we interpret this card? Perhaps we could say you're being given something. Maybe we can even say you're being given something with intention on the part of the giver, since this dog is clearly making eye contact with you as he presents these roses toward you. And I'll post a photo of this card on my Instagram so you can see what I'm talking about. We also see those dog treats down on the floor, and the fact that the dog is holding these roses with such intent rather than gobbling down the treats really emphasizes to me that whatever this dog has for you is extremely important, at least in his opinion. And I don't know why I keep saying he. This dog could be female. So she, unlike a lot of the other dogs in this deck that are focused on targets and items, is making direct eye contact with you, the viewer. I've discussed in other episodes that the gaze of the characters on cards says a lot about where they are directing their energy and what they're focused on. When you're reading multiple cards in a spread, this can become very important because you track where does each character look, and often they're looking at other cards. But just as importantly as looking off to the side or looking down and potentially looking at another card in your spread, sometimes figures on tarot cards are looking right at you, and I think that's something to be noted as well. Bringing it back to the Waite Smith deck, notably Justice, the Hierophant, and the High Priestess are all looking right into your eyes. I know other figures are too, but those are the 3 who come to mind for me right now. But about this dog who's making eye contact with you and presenting you with this bundle of roses, we can read into this that, all right, somebody has got something for me, and they really want me to have it. In itself, that's a pretty basic tarot interpretation. And if this card was part of a larger spread, that might be all it needs to do. Maybe you don't need every card in a spread to tell a whole fleshed out story on its own. Maybe this card is just one story beat in the bigger picture. But that can also feel kind of vague, so okay, somebody has something for me and they really want me to have it. What could that something possibly be? This is where it's helpful to pull in your understanding of Marseille cards. This is a swords card, so we know that the topic has to do with knowledge and understanding. So even with just that added on, maybe we want to read this as somebody has an important message for me, and for them it's very important that I receive this message. And then to add another dimension to it, it's a 3, and 3s are about connection and collaboration. So putting all of that together, we might interpret this card as somebody has an important bit of information for me, and perhaps the reason why they're so intent that I receive it is because it involves a collaboration between us, or something involving the 2 of us together. Maybe they need my help, or maybe they see that I need help or will very soon, and they're trying to reach out to help me out. On the Waite Smith deck, this is the card that's the heart with the 3 swords going through it, and the background is all gray and stormy with lots of raindrops falling everywhere. Looking solely at the picture, it can be difficult to not read that card in a negative way. But remember, no card is inherently positive or negative. It's all about context. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I really like this dog tarot's depiction of the 3 of Swords. It communicates the energy without putting a specific spin on it. And now, if you Google the Three of Swords, you're going to find sources telling you that it's a sorrowful card and that it's one of the most negative cards in the deck. Even Wikipedia lists it that way. I don't like this depiction of the card because I don't like when a card tells you how to feel about the information it's giving. And yes, I know a lot of artists used Pamela Coleman Smith's depiction as essentially a template, and I think this is one where Pamela Coleman Smith didn't do a great job of depicting the card. And now, who's to say what a card ultimately means? After all, this is all human-made meaning, and who's the authority on what a card is or isn't? This is where I reach back to my understanding of Marseille-style cards. That system has always made sense to me because it presented the meanings of each card as a straightforward concept onto which you then put your intuition and really understand how they fit together. I guess if I'm giving away anything about my background here, it's that that's how I learned. I didn't learn on a Marseille-style deck either. I learned on a Waite Smith deck, but from somebody who had been reading for a very long time, and although I don't know her background, she had a very Marseille-focused understanding of the deck, and I think that left an imprint on me. And I think that provided a very good underpinning for my later adventures in tarot. Go take a look at a Marseille-style depiction of the Three of Swords. It's just three swords. That's it, it's literally just three swords. There isn't an illustration for you to walk yourself through and describe, which can make it feel very inaccessible to a newer reader. A Marseille-style deck really demands that you know a definition for each card. So then when does tarot card reading become intuitive? Because you might be hearing this and saying, it sounds like you've just memorized a set of definitions and you just apply them to the cards. For me, the intuitive part comes in from putting those cards together and understanding the narrative that they're telling. This is something that I get asked about a lot, and it's been something numerous people have requested I cover on this podcast. That's worth a whole episode unto itself, and that's what we're going to cover next week. But as a little teaser for next week, the long and short of my approach to reading tarot cards is that your intuition is how you determine who are the characters in this story, what is the context, and ultimately, if the cards are throwing all of this objective information at you, how do you file it and understand it and turn it into something that's helpful for your querent or for you if you're reading for yourself? I don't use spreads a ton, but if this is something that you're just starting to get comfortable with, a spread can be very helpful because when you use a pre-designed tarot spread, you essentially have a template to work with, which actually brings us to our next topic, the year ahead spread. A year ahead spread is a really enjoyable way to kick off the year, in my opinion. And it's something that I do every year. In fact, it's something that I've been doing every year for quite a while now. I would say my first year ahead spread I probably pulled in 2016 or 2017, so we're really coming on close to a decade now. It's wild how time flies. But anyway, my absolute favorite year ahead spread is one that was taught to me by one of my tarot teachers and mentors. Not the woman I mentioned earlier in this episode, someone who I met later who also played a really significant role in shaping how I interact with the cards. I'm going to do my best to verbally walk you through this spread, but because this is an auditory medium, I understand it might be a little bit difficult to follow along. I also made a video about this spread, which I'm going to share on my Instagram, so that way if it's easier for you to watch the video to visualize it, go check that out. This was my first stab at YouTube, so there are definitely things that I'm going to do better in subsequent videos, but that sounds like something to think about when I make those subsequent videos. I'll also stick a static image of the spread on my Instagram in case you don't want to watch a whole video about it. It's a 20-card spread, which, yeah, is pretty huge. And it's comprehensive. It is thorough. So what I want you to do is take your deck and give it a good shuffle. As you shuffle, focus on the year ahead. Think about 2025 and focus on, what am I doing this year? What are my hopes? What are my goals? What am I going to experience throughout the 12 months of 2025? Once you feel they're sufficiently shuffled, it's time to start pulling. First, you'll pull out the cards that symbolize the 4 quarters of the year: winter, spring, summer, and fall. Place them down in front of you in a square pattern. Think of it as a set of 2 columns and 2 rows with an equal amount of distance between them. Space them so you're about 4 cards width between the 2 columns and about 2 cards height between the rows. So right now, looking down at your spread, you should have 4 cards on your table in a square pattern. Next, you're going to pull cards for each of the 12 months of the year. So, one for January, one for February, one for March, April, you know the rest of the months. Be mindful of the order that you pull them out in. Once you have all 12, arrange them underneath each quarter. This is why you left space in your spread. So, treating your upper left-hand card as quarter 1, put your cards for January, February, and March underneath it. You should now have a pattern of 1 card up top, a row of 3 cards beneath it, and then a singular card underneath. That singular card underneath is your card for quarter 3. Pull quarter 2's cards, April, May, June, and put them beneath your upper right-hand card. Then, pull July, August, September, and put them underneath your lower left-hand card, and then finish it out with quarter 4, October, November, December, and put them underneath your lower right-hand card. So now, looking down at your spread, you should have 4 rows. The top row should have 2 cards with some space between them. The second from the top row should have 6 cards that don't have a ton of space between them. Your third row down is another 2 cards, and then your fourth row is another 6 cards. Again, I realize that walking you through this only verbally can make it a little bit difficult to visualize, so if you're getting confused, take a look over at my Instagram and you'll see this pattern. It's very straightforward and logical, but sometimes you need to see something visually to then see it in your mind's eye. So wait, we're not done. I did say this is a 20 card spread, and you've only got 16 cards out. Now you're going to pull your last 4 cards. These cards are going to be placed on the outer sections of your spread, so above your top row and beneath your bottom row. These cards are your big picture cards. So, pull one for the current year. This card sums up what 2025 is going to be for you, and this is going to go over on the upper right-hand side, right above your quarter 2 card. Then, pull the current year -1. That goes over in your upper left-hand corner or above your quarter 1 card. Next, we're going to pull current year +1. That goes underneath your bottom row on the left-hand side, so it'll be underneath your row of 6 cards. And then we pull current year +2. Put that over on the lower right-hand side. Now, whether you pulled all these cards and placed them face down and flip them all up at once, or you place them face up so that way you look at the year as it unfolds, doesn't matter. Whatever, don't get caught up on something like that. People ask me all the time, should I put it face down or put it face up? They're going to get flipped right up anyway, so whether you did that already or you do that at this step, makes 0 difference. But before we start interpreting our cards, I want to give a little bit more explanation for that outer row that we just pulled. Current year, as I said, sums up the year as a whole. It's what all your quarterly cards and then your monthly cards ultimately produce for you, and when you look back on your life, you're going to say, hey, 2025 was marked by blank. Current year -1 is where things get a little bit tricky. This isn't just a straight up summary of 2024 for you. I interpret it in this spread more so as what was 2024 as it relates to 2025 for me. So not 2024 in a vacuum, but what roads did I pave in 2024 and what seeds did I plant that are all going to become more prominent in 2025. Similarly, your current year +1 and current year +2 are 2026 and 2027 as they relate to 2025. So your current year +1 is what am I currently setting myself up for now? What 2026 am I building from the vantage point of where I am now in 2025? Then, current year plus 2 is the same. That's a little further down the road, but it's again, what kind of 2027 am I setting myself up for here now in 2025? Here's an example. Let's say, fast forward in reality, it is 2027, and you pull the Emperor for that year. As you stand on January 1st, 2027, you interpret that as this is going to be the year that I am really ambitious and that I absolutely go after my goals and stop at nothing to get what I'm after and to set the pace for who am I and what am I doing and what's the pace for the people who follow me and rely on me. But now let's travel back in time to 2025. Maybe this year you've pulled the Three of Swords, and the year 2025 for you is going to be marked by important information that might not necessarily care about your feelings, but is critical, objective information. And isn't necessarily sorrowful information. I will die on that hill that this card isn't inherently bad news. But anyway, while you're pulling that to summarize 2025, you also pull a current year plus 2 card, and from it, you get the Six of Swords. So you might interpret that as, I'm currently setting myself up with all of this information that, thinking of it like the facts don't care about your feelings and that this sucks, but what are you going to do about it? Think of it as the facts didn't even consider your feelings in the first place. Your feelings weren't part of the story. This is a Swords card. So while you're spending this year receiving that sort of information and determining how am I going to move forward with it, you're setting yourself up to do just that in 2027. This is the information that now, 2 years from now, is the sort of thing that's going to be propelling you to apply your knowledge in more productive places, a la our Six of Swords. From our vantage point here in 2025, you see that as paving the way forward to put your knowledge to work. Then by the time 2027 rolls around, you can see that the same theme is repeated, but now it's the spotlight is on you. Now is the time to take what's yours and do your Emperor ambitious thing. Keep this idea of the cards being contextual and relating to each other in mind as you interpret your quarters and months. The months nest under the quarters, so think of each card for the quarter as the overarching energy of those 3 months, and then the monthly cards beneath these as the individual energies for each month. So for example, let's say you pull up your card for quarter 1 and it's the Nine of Swords. For January, February, and March, you might be feeling a lot of racing thoughts and a lot of possibly some anxiety, but overall the sense that you just can't get out of your head. There's just a lot of information, and it's making it difficult to focus on anything else. This is another card that I think sometimes gets a bit of a bad rap because of the way it's depicted in the Waite Smith deck. And if I'm realizing anything from this episode, it's that maybe we need individual episodes about each of the minor suits. But anyway, if you look at the Waite Smith depiction of this card, clearly the figure is not having a great time. And it's because they're really up in their own head. Swords are thoughts, and some of those thoughts are valid, some of them aren't. This card isn't necessarily saying that, yeah, everything you're anxious about is true and is real. It's saying you're anxious about a lot of things, and it's taking up all of your mental bandwidth. Maybe a better word than anxious here would be focused, because you're focused on a lot of things. You're thinking a lot, and you're preoccupied with it. But before we go too deep down that rabbit hole, let's stay focused on our year ahead spread. For the first quarter of this year, you may find yourself in your head a lot and focused a lot on racing and possibly competing or contradictory thoughts. I think the quarter will be marked by a lot of internal looking and thinking rather than a whole lot of doing. And next, let's look at the individual months. For January, we've got the Seven of Cups. For February, we've got the Hanged Man. And for March, we've got the Empress. So, First, we can read them all individually. January will be a month marked by a lot of weighing out of your different options and opportunities, particularly weighing out how you feel about them. This is a Cups card. What do you actually want? How are the different opportunities that you're sizing up going to make you feel? You might find yourself spending January surveying different options and focusing in on what's actually going to make me feel good and what's actually going to align with me emotionally, because I've got 6 different directions I could go right now and I'm not yet committed to any one of them. Nesting this into the card that you pulled for the quarter, you can see how overall for the quarter you're doing a lot of thinking. But in January, most of that thinking is focused on how do you feel and how are different opportunities potentially going to play out for you. I think this combination of cards is a really good illustration that logic and emotion aren't opposites of each other. Sometimes they're very deeply intertwined. And then moving on to February, we have the Hanged Man. If you missed the episode about this card, go back and give it a listen because I explain how it's a card that's all about shifting your perspective because you're forced to sit on the sidelines. You're not in the thick of the action anymore. You're sitting back and you're observing, and through that observation, you're understanding things from a different perspective. So, for you, you might spend February feeling a bit stuck. You might feel like you're forced to sit on the sidelines of your own life or things that you previously enjoyed doing. And while being forced to sit on those sidelines, you're watching others make progress. February might end up being somewhat of a frustrating month for you, but if you keep this idea in mind that you're learning and you're understanding, it might at least be one that you come out of it feeling a bit more grounded and focused. Because again, let's link it back up to our card for the quarter. This quarter, we're sitting in this overarching energy of I'm in my head and I'm very focused and I'm thinking a lot and really looking critically at my situation. And in February, perhaps you're doubling down on that and you're realizing just how stuck you are. Maybe after assessing opportunities and wants and needs in January, you're now having to feel like you're sitting with your decision in February. So see how also month to month can set you up for one thing after the next. Then let's take a look at March. In March, you've got the Empress. So you've got very grounded abundance. You've got creative, nurturing energy that pours all of itself into what you're cultivating to ensure that whatever it is you're cultivating becomes a success. After February, this sounds great. And perhaps it's the logical next step after having to sit back and reflect and remove yourself from the action for a while, just so that way you could understand what is the next move for you. This is still quarter one, so this is still nested under that 9 of Swords. So to drop these two into context, I would say you're extremely focused on what it is you're building and nurturing, and also a sense of how are you grounding yourself through doing this, because the Empress is a very grounded card. She's associated with Venus, which is a very sensual, very environment-loving planet. It's the ruling planet of Taurus and Libra, and those guys love lush environments. So you're still focused and you're still thinking hard about it, and it seems like you're taking that focus and you're channeling it into something productive. It seems like, so to sum up quarter one, you're going to kick off the new year weighing your options and trying to get in better touch with what's aligning with you most emotionally. You're using your logical mind, your 9 of Swords, to work out what's going to serve your heart and your soul over there in your 7 of Cups. And then you're going to spend the month of February seeing, how am I actually going to make this work? You're focused and you recognize that you're not taking a whole ton of action just yet, but perhaps you're hibernating and thinking and lying in wait, not unlike that groundhog that comes out and tells you if, when the sun's going to come back. And then by March, you're ready to dig in and take action. Perhaps by March, when you look back on the year that you had so far, these cards will make a whole lot more sense, and they'll make you feel a bit better about your decision to lie in wait and sit and not get shot out of a cannon on the first week of January, like, I'm going to crush my goals this year. I'm going to kick those KPIs like everybody else in your LinkedIn feed is doing. So then this sets us up for quarter two. Let's say, for example, you've got the Three of Wands for quarter two, and then beneath April, you have the Ace of Cups. May, you have Death, and June, you have the Ten of Pentacles. Follow the same exact process to understand quarter two, and then do the same exact thing for quarters 3 and 4. Once you're finished, you'll have a good outlook of the whole year ahead of you. What I like to do is take a photo of this and then also journal about it. I write down quarter by quarter how I interpret each card, and then month by month how I interpret that card, and also any predictions I have for tangible things that might happen. For example, we might read that Death card as breaking up with a client or starting fresh in a new field. And for you, maybe it doesn't have to be career related. Maybe it's breaking up with a bad friend or starting fresh in a new city. The cards in your spread can possibly give each other some context. So what I do is jot everything down, and then as the year wears on, every month I go back to my year ahead spread notes and I write in what ended up happening during that month. What did I experience? How did I feel? What did I do? And I compare notes. Sometimes my predictions are very accurate. Other times they kind of sort of give the vibe, but what ended up happening is not what I expected at all. And sometimes I just flat out get it wrong. It happens. But being able to go back and revisit your year month by month can be a good way to see how the tarot cards play out in real time. And it's a neat thing to look back on the following December. One of my favorite things about New Year's Eve is going back through my year ahead journal and seeing the year I had. Because the year ahead spread that you do now can become a year in review 12 months from now. So give yourself a nice present for next New Year's Eve. That about wraps our discussion today. If you decide to do this year ahead spread, let me know how it goes for you. I love hearing people's thoughts on tarot stuff. You can reach me at omg@omgtarot.com, or you can find me on Instagram, where my handle is its_omg_tarot. Of course, if you have any questions at all, please email me, DM me. I'm always around. And if you want a visual look at this spread, check out my Instagram, because I'll be posting the static image of this as well as the video I made walking you through it. Otherwise, if you like what you heard, feel free to give me a follow and leave me a 5-star review. It really, really helps. And beyond that, I hope 2025 is off to a great start for you, and I'll catch you next week. Talk soon. Bye-bye.